10 California towns where home values have crashed harder than almost anywhere else in the state, ranked by the severity of the decline, counting down to one coastal community that has lost more value than nearly any place in California. Every single figure comes directly from current Zillow data. Some of these entries will genuinely catch you off guard, because several of them rank among the most visually stunning places the state has ever produced. Here's the full story. Number 10, Sonora. Number 10 takes us into Sierra Nevada foothills to the old gold rush settlement of Sonora, the county seat of Tuolumne County, an historic gateway town that travelers pass through on their way toward the high country and Yosemite. This is a postcard brought to life. Red brick storefronts crowded together along Washington Street, a whitewashed church presiding from the hill above, pine-covered ridgelines rising up on every side. The kind of authentic Main Street that a Hollywood location scout would drive 3 hours for. And it is precisely the sort of place a Bay Area family stumbled into on an extended weekend during the pandemic, sat down to a slow breakfast, looked at each other across the table, and decided right then that they absolutely had to own a piece of it. A great many of them followed through on that impulse. And that impulse is a significant part of why Sonora opens this countdown. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $413,000, down 5.1% over the past year. A decline that lands on top of the ground as market already surrendered coming off its 2022 high. Here is a mechanism driving that fall, and it is worth holding on to carefully because you're going to watch it repeat itself across every single entry on this list. When remote work became widespread, people who could suddenly draw a large city salary from any location on the map looked at towns like Sonora and saw a paradise available at a genuine discount. They competed aggressively against one another, and the prices ran far beyond anything the underlying local economy could ever have generated independently. Because this is a county where the wages flow from tourism, the hospital, the school system, and county government, not from technology salaries. The median local income never came close to justifying what those outside buyers were paying. It did not need to, as long as the outside buyers kept arriving. Then the window closed. Interest rates doubled in months. Employers began summoning workers back to physical offices. The flow of remote buyers evaporated almost overnight. And a town whose prices have been sustained entirely by outside capital found itself standing on its actual foundation, which is considerably lower than the peak ever suggested. Number 9, Sebastopol. Number 9 is among the most expensive entries on this entire list, and it is still losing ground. Sebastopol sits in the apple orchard country of western Sonoma County, 10 minutes from the wine country, and an entirely different world from the tourist congestion filling the valley below. An artsy, affluent, deeply coveted little town of farm stands, cider operations, and tasting rooms has been one of the most sought-after addresses in the entire North Bay for years. This is where Bay Area wealth goes when it wants the wine country lifestyle without the bumper-to-bumper Napa traffic. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $1,074,000, down 3.9% over the past year. Now, 3.9% may sound modest position next to the double-digit collapses appearing later in this countdown, and I want to be transparent about that. But run the actual arithmetic on $1 million home for a moment. That percentage represents more than $40,000 of value gone in 12 months, and it accumulates directly on top of whatever this town already lost coming down from its 2022 peak. When the base is this high, a figure that sounds small in percentage terms translates into an amount of money larger than most Americans earn in an entire year, simply evaporated from a single property, while the owner did absolutely nothing wrong. Sebastopol's specific vulnerability is the wine country problem, and arrives in two interconnected forms, insurance and fire. This is a region where carriers have retreated so completely that a homeowner can do everything correctly, clear every inch of brush, reinforce the roof, follow every regulation, and still pull a non-renewal notice from the mailbox. Once the private market declines to cover you, the fallback options cost a fortune and protect far less. Every prospective buyer examining a Sebastopol listing now has to price that exposure before they even begin calculating the mortgage. And underneath the insurance calculation sits the fire itself. The memory of smoke-filled skies hanging over the hills, the evacuation warnings that have become a reliable feature of every autumn in this region. That fear operates in every transaction, whether anyone chooses to name it or not. Number 8, Calistoga. Number 8 remains in wine country and pushes the price tag even higher up the ridge. Calistoga occupies the very top of the Napa Valley, the small town at the end of the road, famous for its hot springs, its traditional mud baths, and the spa resorts that pull visitors up from San Francisco for weekends of extravagant pampering. It is the town people choose when they want everything the Napa Valley offers without the gridlock of the valley floor. And it is expensive, even by the severe standards of Napa County. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $1,034,000, down 4.9% over the past year, a steeper annual drop than Sebastopol on a base that is every bit as elevated. The dollars leaving this market are staggering. Nearly $50,000 of value peeled away from the typical home in a single year, stacked directly on top of the decline Calistoga already absorbed descending from its 2022 peak. Calistoga tells the wine country story in its most concentrated and unfiltered form. The local economy runs almost entirely on two pillars, tourism and the wine business. The housing inventory is a peculiar barbell. Quaint cottages at one end, multi-million-dollar vineyard estates at the other, with almost nothing in between and virtually nothing a working family could realistically afford. That structure leaves this market essentially completely dependent on discretionary spending. Second home buyers seeking a retreat among the vines. Early retirees liquidating a Bay Area property. People purchasing a lifestyle, a fantasy, a place to open a bottle of wine on a terrace at dusk rather than a practical address from which to live and work. And here is the fundamental truth about discretionary money, the money that purchases wants rather than needs. It is always, without exception, the first money to freeze when conditions grow uncertain. The instant the economy wobbles and borrowing becomes genuinely painful, the person who is planning to buy the vineyard cottage decides to wait a year and see what happens. A town built entirely around that kind of buyer feels a chill immediately and feels it everywhere simultaneously. Number 7, Eureka. Number 7 brings us to the coast, far up north, considerably farther than most Californians have ever driven in their lives. Eureka is the largest city on California's rugged northern coastline, a fog-wrapped, salt-warm Victorian port town curled around Humboldt Bay, a full 6 hours above San Francisco, and a genuine world unto itself behind what locals call the Redwood Curtain. Ornate 19th century mansions, working fishing vessels, the mingled smell of the sea and the timber mills, a place that carries the feeling of a maritime town that drifted down intact from another century. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $424,000, down 4.5% over the past year. What makes Eureka fundamentally different from every other entry on this list is worth slowing down for, because it changes what that number actually means. The mountain towns and the wine country towns fell because outside capital inflated them far beyond their natural levels and then retreated. Eureka was never really that kind of place. This is a working city, a fishing and timber and university town, where the overwhelming majority of homeowners actually live, work, and raise families year-round in the fog. There is no army of weekend owners here, no vineyard fantasy, no Airbnb investment rush. So when a genuinely functional working town starts shedding value, it is communicating something considerably more serious than a vacation market simply cooling off. It is telling you that the local buyers themselves, the people who actually belong to this place, are stretched to their limits. Interest rates that doubled hit a working-class economy far harder than they hit a wealthy one. And the reason is straightforward. In Eureka, there is no deep reserve of cash buyers waiting in the background to absorb anything that dips. The paychecks here come from the hospital, from Cal Poly Humboldt up the road, from the port, from county government. Not one of those employers issued a raise large enough to absorb a mortgage payment that abruptly jumped by $1,000 or more per month. Number 6, Guerneville. Number 6 drops us down into the redwoods along the Russian River to Guerneville, one of the most genuinely cherished weekend destinations in all of Northern California. This is a river town an hour and a half north of San Francisco, where generations of Bay Area families have floated lazily downstream on inner tubes, rented a cabin beneath towering old growth trees, and vanished from their real lives for a long weekend. A place soaked in nostalgia and filtered afternoon light, and that quality, That precise, irreplaceable sense of belonging to a simpler version of things is exactly what landed it here. Zillow puts the typical home at approximately $568,000, down 8.5% over the past year. We have now stepped into genuinely serious territory, because 8.5% is a real, painful, wealth-destroying decline by any honest measure. Guerneville is a short-term rental town, right down to its structural bones. For years, the investment arithmetic on a Guerneville cabin felt almost irresistible, and the Bay Area real estate community seemed to run the same calculation simultaneously. Purchase a cabin in the Redwoods, list it on the vacation rental platforms, collect the income from the steady summer stream of river visitors, and allow that revenue to quietly service the mortgage while the property appreciates. The model worked, or at least it worked for a period. That wave of investor demand drove cabin prices to heights the small river town had never encountered. Then 3 separate things went wrong at nearly the same moment, and together they dismantled the mechanism. First, the short-term rental market became badly oversaturated. Too many cabins competing for the same pool of weekend visitors, softening both nightly rates and occupancy figures simultaneously. Second, Sonoma County tightened its regulations on vacation rentals, introducing permits, caps, and active enforcement that made the operation progressively harder and more expensive to sustain. Third, the river did exactly what the river has always done. It flooded. Guerneville occupies a floodplain. It always has. And the flood insurance costs that reality carries have been climbing relentlessly every year, adding another weight to an already strained equation. Number 5, Arnold. Number 5 carries us back up into the Sierra Nevada, higher this time, deep into the tall pines above the gold country, to the mountain community of Arnold in Calaveras County. If you have never once encountered the name Arnold, that is genuinely the essence of what this place is. Arnold is a small, quiet, heavily forested vacation enclave threaded along Highway 4 on the approach to the Calaveras Big Trees. Cabins tucked under massive conifers, with smoke in the winter air, snow accumulating on the access roads, a couple of hours above the flat heat of the Central Valley. The archetypal California mountain retreat, the second home you drive toward rather than the town you claim as your own. Zillow puts the typical home in the zip code covering this community at approximately $449,000, down 9.4% over the past year. That is a steep, serious, genuinely alarming rate of decline, one that positions Arnold near the very top of the entire state for single-year losses, ahead of towns with considerably larger profiles. Arnold represents the second home concept in something close to its purest form, and that purity is precisely what makes it so structurally fragile. The people who own these cabins overwhelmingly live somewhere else, down in the valley, across in the Bay Area, and they come up for weekends, for school holidays, for the first significant snowfall of the season, which means that nearly every property in this community is discretionary by definition, a want rather than a need. The weekend luxury that is always, without exception, the first item a household reconsiders the moment the financial picture tightens. When the broader economy grew uncertain and interest rates made carrying a second mortgage genuinely, persistently expensive, the beloved weekend cabin quietly transformed from a source of joy into a source of pressure, a luxury a considerable number of families examined honestly and decided they could no longer justify maintaining. So they listed, and when a meaningful share of discretionary owners in a small, illiquid market all decide to sell at roughly the same time into a shrinking buyer pool, the price has no direction available but down. Number 4, Nevada City. Number 4 is one of the most genuinely charming towns in the entire state of California, and it is declining almost as fast as anything else on this list. Nevada City sits up in the Sierra foothills north of Auburn, a perfectly, almost improperly preserved gold rush town of narrow, gaslit streets, iron balcony Victorian storefronts, an historic downtown so completely intact that it reads like a film set constructed by someone who cared deeply about getting every detail right. The kind of place that lands on National Best Small Towns lists with reliable consistency. People do not merely appreciate Nevada City. They develop a specific, consuming attachment to it. They organize major life decisions around the goal of eventually living there. Zillow puts the typical home at approximately $567,000, down 9.5% over the past year, a genuinely hard, breath-catching fall for a place that's universally adored. And right there, Embedded in that contradiction is the central lesson of this entire video. Please stay with this one, because it is the argument the whole countdown is building toward. Charm is not a floor. Let that settle, because it runs directly against the instinctive belief that most people carry into conversations about real estate. A town can be objectively gorgeous, historically significant, walkable, artistically alive, everything that real estate editorial content celebrates, and it can still watch its home values fall 9.5% in a single calendar year, because the force that was actually holding those prices elevated was never the charm itself. It was cheap money and outside buyers, and both of those things departed. Nevada City appreciated at a ferocious pace during the pandemic years, when remote workers who earned a San Francisco salary from anywhere on the planet looked at this dreamlike foothill village and paid absolutely whatever the moment required to place themselves inside it. But the local economy underneath all that frenzied activity has always been small. Tourism, the arts community, some county government functions, the identical thin foundation supporting every foothill town examined in this countdown. When rates doubled and the remote work proposition quietly dissolved, the buyers who had been sustaining those elevated prices simply stopped materializing, and the values they had supported came sliding back down toward the reality of what people who actually live and work in Nevada City can genuinely afford to pay. Number 3, Point Arena. Number 3 returns us to the Mendocino coast, to the tiny, wind-scoured, storm-hardened town of Point Arena, one of the smallest incorporated cities in all of California. This is legitimately the edge of the known world up here, a lighthouse town perched on dramatic, eroding cliffs along the far northern coast. Hours past the point where most tourists ever think to venture, home to only a few hundred permanent residents in total. Zillow puts the typical home at approximately $560,000, down 10.6% over the past year. With that figure, we have crossed officially into double-digit territory, the threshold where these declines stop functioning as polite market adjustments and become something that can only honestly be called a crash. Point Arena demonstrates in miniature and at full intensity exactly what occurs when every force battering these coastal communities concentrates itself into a place that's microscopically small. The buyer pool here was always razor thin to begin with, a narrow trickle of remote work refugees, artists, romantics, and deliberate hermits drawn by the raw, almost violent beauty of a coastline with almost no one on it. During the pandemic, that trickle briefly swelled into something resembling an actual current. And here is a critical dynamic in a town with only a handful of homes ever available. It does not require many enthusiastic, overpaying buyers to send prices into the stratosphere, because the inventory is so limited that each individual transaction sets the benchmark for every other property in the community. But that same razor-thin market cuts with equal precision in the opposite direction. When the outside buyers vanished, as they always eventually do, there was suddenly almost no one positioned to purchase at all. Number 2, Gualala. Number 2 keeps us on that same rugged Mendocino coastline, a few miles further up the winding Tulane Highway, in a community most people mispronounce when they first encounter it in print. It is Gualala, said Walla, a small settlement strung along the coast highway where the Gualala River meets the Pacific at the southern edge of Mendocino County. Second homes, vacation rentals, quiet retirees, and ocean views so complete they appear in every single direction you turn. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $640,000, down 11.7% over the past year, the second steepest decline in this entire countdown. Every force that dismantled Point Arena just a few miles south is fully present here as well, only now with considerably more money, riding on top of the entire structure. Gualala is a vacation and second home market from the ground level to the roof line, a place where buyers purchase aggressively and at great expense into the dream of retiring to a cottage on the coast, or the dream of owning an ocean view property that rented itself out to weekend visitors and quietly covered its own carrying costs. Every mechanism discussed across this entire video descends on this single small community simultaneously, with nothing available to soften any of it. The short-term rental income softened here as it did everywhere else, meaning the properties stopped paying for themselves. The coastal insurance situation became an outright crisis. Finding a carrier willing to write a policy on a structure this exposed to the open Pacific is not a given, and many owners simply cannot manage it at any rational price. The The nearest urban center with genuine employment and medical infrastructure is hours away down a slow, winding road, which compresses a realistic buyer pool down to an almost theoretical number. Number 1, Mendocino. The number 1 position, the town that has lost more home value than nearly any other place in the state of California, belongs to Mendocino. If you have ever watched a film or television production ostensibly set on the rocky coast of New England that was secretly shot in California, you have almost certainly already seen Mendocino, because it serves as a stand-in for coastal Maine with remarkable reliability. It is a jewel-like, precisely preserved Victorian village of ornate wooden architecture, iconic water towers, and white picket fences positioned dramatically on a grassy headland extending directly above the crashing gray Pacific. It is, and this can be said with a completely straight face, arguably the single most beautiful small town in the entire state of California. Zillow puts the typical home here at approximately $918,000, down 15.3% over the past year. 15.3% in one calendar year, on a base sitting close to $1 million. Allow that figure to actually register, because it is an extraordinary number that represents roughly $150,000 of value, simply gone, erased from the typical home in this village within the span of 12 months. And it accumulates directly on top of everything Mendocino had already quietly surrendered descending from its 2022 peak. The most beautiful town in California is, at this precise moment, also among its most significant financial losers. Once you understand exactly why, you understand everything this video has been building toward from the very first entry. Mendocino is what happens when every single force covered across this entire countdown arrives simultaneously at one small town, at full strength, with nothing held in reserve. This is the ultimate vacation and second home market, the final, most extreme expression of everything we have examined. A village where an enormous proportion of the homes are weekend properties, retirement aspirations, and short-term rental investments, where almost no one is present out of any genuine necessity whatsoever. So when short-term rental income softened, it hit Mendocino and it hit hard. Then Mendocino County layered some of the strictest vacation rental regulations in the state directly on top, combined with 10% lodging tax that made the entire rental business dramatically more difficult to rationalize on a spreadsheet. Here is what connects every entry on this list, from Sonora all the way up the coast of Mendocino. Every single one of them is genuinely beautiful. Not one of them fell because it became a worse place to live. They fell because the force that had been elevating the prices was never actually the town itself. It was cheap money and outside demand. Remote workers and second home dreamers and short-term rental investors, all converging on the most visually spectacular corners of California at the same moment, and bidding prices to levels the underlying local economies could never have supported independently under any normal conditions. Then the money became expensive. The rental regulations tightened. The insurance turned into a nightmare. And all that outside demand went home at once. And it turned out there was almost nothing structural underneath it.